For centuries, the 14-line Petrarchan sonnet functioned strictly as an aristocratic device, engineered specifically for romantic meditation and courtly love. Yet this highly decorative, restrictive European format ultimately became the precise mechanism that delivered gritty, modern American realism. The architect of this stylistic pivot was the American poet Edwin Arlington Robinson. Robinson modernized the sonnet by adhering strictly to its rules, using its rigid bipartite architecture to achieve extreme narrative compression. Mapping the macro structure reveals how he utilized these spatial boundaries to force dramatic psychological turns. Zooming in on the micro level reveals intense verbal restraint, right down to specific vowel shifts used to bury subtext within the meter. This exact structural blueprint laid the groundwork for the next generation of poets, most notably Robert Frost. Firm, authoritative, Robinson utilized the sonnet as a piece of linguistic technology, using its rigidity to tightly control the flow of information. This architectural wireframe outlines the unyielding spatial constraint of the Petrarchan sonnet. It requires exactly 14 lines, divided into 2 asymmetrical blocks. The top 8 lines form the octave. Robinson uses this section exclusively to establish a highly specific psychological situation or mystery. In his poem Cliff Klingenhagen, the octave builds a bizarre scenario. A host inexplicably drinks a glass of bitter wormwood while serving his guest sweet wine. Immediately following the 8th line is the volta, or the turn. Robinson treats this physical stanza break as a literal narrative chasm. This gap in the text drastically pivots the momentum, forcing the reader into a state of anticipation for a resolution. That resolution is delivered in the final 6 lines, known as the sestet. Here, Robinson deploys a dramatic reversal, or an ambiguous action, that forces a complete reevaluation of the octave. Returning to Cliff Klingenhagen, the sestet reveals that the host who drank the wormwood is amazingly happy, but he smilingly refuses to explain his actions. By leaving the deeper psychological reality for the reader to decipher, Robinson prevents the poem from rambling towards an inconclusive ending. His 19th-century Victorian peers frequently allowed their romantic narratives to sprawl without a definitive structure. By trapping his character studies inside these rigid architectural boundaries, Robinson forces complex psychological profiles to reach sharp, highly dramatic conclusions. Beyond structure, there is the question of density. How does a poet fit an entire novel's worth of psychological depth into just 14 lines? He achieves this through an aesthetic of profound verbal restraint, entirely rejecting flowery, ornate Victorian descriptions. His core methodology relies on deliberately omitting explicit prose details, leaving the narrative to be inferred through specific linguistic choices. He utilizes metonymic diction, selecting highly specific vocabulary to subtextually hint at a character's internal guilt or trauma. Look at this typographic layout of the poem Reuben Bright. The surface narrative presents a grieving butcher tearing down his slaughterhouse after his wife's death. Isolate the word packed. This word instantly evokes brutal meatpacking, linguistically tethering the protagonist's grief to his violent physical trade. Observe the word chest. While describing a physical object, chest simultaneously suggests the human heart, pointing to the unspoken, internalized emotional burden the butcher carries. Note the phrase chopped up. This connotes the bloody butchery the protagonist can no longer bring himself to perform, implying a hidden complicity in his grief. These lexical choices function as a deliberate encoding mechanism. They force the reader to actively decipher the moral ambiguities Robinson left unwritten. Robinson's intense fastidiousness extends down to the smallest possible unit of language, a single letter. This is line 12 of his meta-sonnet, simply titled Sonnet. In his 1927 revision, Robinson changed the word workshop to workship. A workshop is a common physical place. Workship is an extremely rare, abstract synonym for craftsmanship. This single vowel change immediately redirects the reader's attention away from the literal metaphor of a physical goldsmith's bench. The revision to workship elevates the entire concept back to the poem's abstract tenor, the sheer authority and craftsmanship of thought itself. This exactness of language is paired with a highly specific metrical rhythm, known as the Robinsonian stride. This metrical engine relies on a continuous anapestic roll mixed with iambs. It is designed to mimic the collective footsteps of an endless marching crowd. The heavy, sweeping momentum creates a vast distance, contrasting sharply with the intimate, panicked tick of standard conversational iambic pentameter. By combining exacting typographic revisions with this expansive, detached meter, Robinson creates a physical, hypnotic atmosphere that suspends moral judgment of his subjects. Looking at this timeline of the sonnet's evolution, Robinson's career sits as a direct structural bridge between past and future. By writing sonnets on the sonnet, he engaged in direct metapoetic dialogue with 19th-century British masters like Keats and Rossetti. Having proven the archaic form could evolve technically, Robinson then executed a radical thematic shift, turning the sonnet into a deft political instrument. He populated his fictional Tilbury town with ordinary citizens, aging clerks, grieving butchers, and lonely social outcasts. He used the classical aristocratic structures to elevate the struggles of these marginalized working-class American subjects, treating them with profound empathy. This exact architectural and thematic blueprint traces forward directly to Robert Frost. Frost was notoriously reluctant to credit his influences, but critics universally regard him as the poet who learned the most from Robinson's approach to verse. Frost adopted Robinson's exact methodology, using inherited forms and strict meters to meticulously depict homely, rural American subjects. Frost's masterpiece, Design, operates as the direct descendant of Robinson's dark, formally perfect psychological sonnetry. Robinson engineered the precise, durable linguistic bridge that carried poetry out of Victorian Romanticism and into the stark reality of American modernism. Looking at this timeline of the sonnet's evolution, Robinson's career sits as a structural bridge between past and future. By writing sonnets on the sonnet, he engaged in a direct metapoetic dialogue with 19th-century British masters like John Keats and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Having proven the archaic form could evolve technically, Robinson executed a radical thematic shift, turning the sonnet into a deft political instrument. He populated fictional Tilbury town with ordinary citizens, aging clerks, grieving butchers, and lonely social outcasts. He used the classical aristocratic structures to elevate the struggles of these marginalized working-class American subjects, treating them with profound empathy. This exact architectural and thematic blueprint traces forward directly to Robert Frost. Frost was notoriously reluctant to credit his influences, but critics universally regard him as the poet who learned most from Robinson's approach to verse. Frost adopted Robinson's exact methodology, using inherited forms and strict meters to meticulously depict homely, rural American subjects. Frost's masterpiece, Design, operates as the direct descendant of Robinson's dark, formally perfect psychological sonnetry. Robinson engineered the precise, durable linguistic bridge that carried poetry out of Victorian Romanticism and into the stark reality of American modernism.